morning, everybody. Welcome. My name is Kyla Hannington, and I am the actually, I don't even know my title right now. I'm with the Office of Human Rights, and it is my pleasure to join with our friends, the Prince George's County Memorial Library System and NewSouth Books, to bring you another in our partnership series. This morning, we are going to be talking about this amazing book, The Slave Who Went to Congress. And it is just my pleasure to be able to introduce you today, the authors. Marti Rosner has been an educator for 41 years. She has worked as a classroom teacher, district academic coach, serving Title I schools in Cobb County, Georgia, and most recently led writing workshops for teachers and students at her granddaughter's elementary school. Through the years, she has also enjoyed leading a variety of professional development classes, serving as a teacher consultant for the National Writing Project, and training teachers across the country as a curriculum specialist for Sundance Newbridge, an educational publishing company. Her two grandchildren keep her active as they love spending time outdoors, and she keeps herself active by reading, writing, and traveling. When she sits still, she enjoys her home in Marietta, Georgia. Frye Gaillard, writer in residence at the University of Southern Alabama, has written extensively on Southern race relations, politics, and culture. He is former Southern editor at the Charlotte Observer, where he covered Charlotte's landmark school desegregation controversy, the ill-fated ministry of televangelist Jim Baker, the funeral of Elvis Presley, and the presidency of Jimmy Carter. He is the author of more than 25 works of nonfiction and the winner of multiple literary prizes, including the Lillian Smith Book Award, the Fitzgerald Museum Literary Prize, the Clarence Kaysen Award, the Alabama Governor's Award for the Arts, the Jefferson Cup Honor Book, the Gustav Myers Award, and NPR Great Read of 2018. So it's a complete thrill to have them both with us this morning, and we're delighted to bring them with you. And we have a special host today from the Prince George's County Library System. We welcome two librarians from Bowie, Marcia from the South Bowie branch, who's a library associate too, and John, who's an adult librarian one with the Bowie branch. It is just my pleasure to have all four of you here today. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It is so wonderful to be here. So Frye and Marty, it is such a pleasure to meet you both. Frye, would you take a minute to talk about the work, how you collaborated, how you both collaborated, and how did you get your research material?
Well, the book tells the story of Benjamin Sterling Turner, who was the first African-American congressman from the state of Alabama. And I just kind of stumbled upon his story as I was writing something more contemporary about the civil rights movement in Alabama. And I was in Selma and learned about this extraordinary man that I had never heard of, and realized in the course of that he was not alone, that a number of the African-American members of Congress during Reconstruction offered the country a vision of racial justice and racial reconciliation that, had it been heeded, would have put us, I think, way ahead of where we are now. And Marty and I were talking about this story. We've been friends a long time, and we decided we would try to tell the story for young readers. And our idea was hard history through stories of inspiration. That is, you can look back at slavery, you can look back at the disappointments and the brutalities of Reconstruction, but you can make it where young readers can find it accessible by telling the story of inspirational figures who pushed back and tried to make things better. And so that was really the idea behind writing the book, and it's gotten a good response from kids. We've had a good time when we've done school programs.
Yeah, we have.
You want to read a little bit?
Shall I read a little bit?
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing your process. Marty, can you please do us the honor of reading The Slave Who Went to Congress?
I would love to. One of the things that I love about the book is this is the book jacket. But when you take the book jacket off, there's a beautiful photograph of Benjamin Sterling Turner on the front of the book. And I'm just going to read from a couple of different places in the book. 40 long years I lived as a slave. 40 years, mere property, thought of as nothing more than the mules or horses or furniture. I've been told my life growing up in Selma, Alabama was a privileged life, as there were others who suffered more than I, but I would argue that no man is privileged when enslaved. Even at the young age of 5, I knew my place. Yet the desire, the yearning for an education lived in me as an illusion, an idea that would come alive on what I called reading mornings. I just want to show those illustrations. They're so pretty. Can you see them?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. On reading mornings, my curiosity would get the better of me as I crouched, hidden by the parlor door, watching, listening to the magic of my owner, the widow Mrs. Turner, reading with her children. Reading mornings were priceless to me as they opened the gift of possibilities. I felt I'd found heaven when the children's nurse, a young slave girl, took me into her confidence. She had learned the alphabet from the mistress's children and taught me all she knew. I found books and newspapers from which to practice my reading and hid them, lest I be discovered. It would be a hard road if my efforts were found out. Through sheer determination, I carried on. It took years of stumbling over the printed word. The New York Herald and the New York Tribune became my friends. Listening became ever more important to me. Anytime there were political discussions which could affect my fate, I was there, the ever-efficient servant, listening, learning. Once when I was 19, I was hired out to work at a steam mill, and the overseer caught me with a spelling book. "If I ever catch you with a book in your hands again," he yelled, "I'll give you 500 lashes on your bare back." Alabama law forbade slaves to seek an education for fear that knowledge would increase their discontent. From the time of Nat Turner's rebellion in 1831, white slave owners across the South were vigilant in the law's enforcement. Yet I too was vigilant in my dream of an education. Nothing would stop me. And really, nothing did. He went on, had many other interesting turns in his life. He ran the St. James Hotel in Selma, which is still there. He was married and had a child. And then in 1870, several leading citizens of Selma, both black and white, urged that I run for Congress. They had written a letter to a local newspaper expressing a high opinion of my abilities. It was humbling to be held in such regard. My reply explained my stance on the issues. My campaign slogan would be universal suffrage, universal amnesty. And some of his constituents were very surprised, but in the end, he says, I was filled with hope. My opponent, Democrat Samuel J. Cummings, was a prominent white man. Although I was opposed by many whites, I had the support of the larger portion of the district, the freedmen. When the votes were counted, I had defeated Mr. Cummings soundly. I thought back to those magical reading mornings when my dreams of an education and freedom first took flight. Now I, Benjamin Sterling Turner, would take my seat as a free man in the halls of Congress, not only as a proud representative of the people of Alabama, but the first of my race to do so. I would do my best to bind the wounds of war and uphold the rights of all. And that's the end. And there we go.
Wow, that's such a powerful story.
It definitely is a powerful story. We had so much fun researching it. We went to Selma several times. We actually stayed at the St. James Hotel.
Wow.
Yeah, that was extraordinary.
So how did the illustrations by John Haggard really complemented the story?
Haggard.
Yeah.
Haggard, yeah. So
Right.
were you guys involved in choosing the illustrations?
Yes. We were having trouble finding an illustrator because NewSouth is a small publishing house and they don't have a tremendous pocket, you know, for that. So I have a friend of mine who has suggested his cousin, who at that time was a freshman at the University of Florida. And we were in touch with her, Jordana, and asked her to send us a couple of illustrations, which she did, and they were beautiful. And we showed them to our publisher, and she suggested we send Jordana a couple of pages from the book and see what her vision was for the illustrations. And they were so powerful when they came back. We just decided this is great. And she was wonderful.
Yeah, one of the things that makes a good picture book is that you can see the illustrations, and the illustration tells the stories, you know, without the words. And it was beautifully done.
Thank you.
And it was amazing because it was her first time illustrating a book. And
Wow.
she just is a young woman of extraordinary talent. We really enjoyed working with her.
Yeah, it was beautiful.
Yeah.
So you had access to a lot of information. What made you guys decide to do it? Tell the story in the first person.
You know, it came to me. I had read so many of his speeches and letters, and I just started thinking about different ways to portray him. And I said to Frye, I think I need to write it. And it may be, you know, may not be the best, but I just felt like I needed to put his words out there, or what he might have said. Of course, it wasn't quoted by any stretch of the imagination, but, you know, I felt like just because of our seeming familiarity with his voice through his writings, that I could do that. So that's, you know, he listened for a while and he felt it was the right thing to do. So that's what we did.
We knew the patterns of his speech, the way he thought, because he prepared these amazing speeches to deliver on the floor of Congress about citizenship rights for all people who had been formerly enslaved, and about the right to vote, and the need to change the tax structure so it did not adversely affect poor farmers, and particularly black farmers. But at the same time, he opposed punishment for his white neighbors who had fought for the Confederacy. And we thought that there was a kind of almost looking forward into history, almost a kind of Nelson Mandela or Martin Luther King kind of quality in the way he thought and the way he approached the issues. And we knew from letters and from those speeches, which are in the Congressional Globe, which was the forerunner of the Congressional Record, we knew how he spoke, and so that kind of guided us. And some of the dialogue or his dialogue invented detail, but some of it is taken directly from what he actually said. And so we just felt like there was an immediacy there that helped to bring him alive, which is what we wanted to do. You know, he was a man of such extraordinary character. He was so determined and just instinctively understood the importance of an education. You know, the importance of learning to read, and wouldn't let anything stand in his way, and was determined to be free, and all of those things. So we wanted people to have as intimate a sense of who he was as they possibly could. That was our thinking.
Yeah. So he was a slave for 40 years. What was it like for slaves in Alabama? I mean, what was it like?
It was a mean place.
Yeah.
You know, it was, there was a lot of harsh treatment. You know, I mean, he was threatened, and this, you know, the facts in the book are, we didn't make any of those up. So he was really threatened with 500 lashes when he was caught with a book, you know. I mean, think of the cruelty of that, you know. He escaped it, but I mean, the fact that the guy intended to do it, who threatened him with that, is kind of indicative of what slave life was like. At the same time, Mr. Turner, because he was such an extraordinary person, because he was literate, was chosen to do jobs that other enslaved people weren't. I mean, for example, while his owner was away fighting for the Confederacy, he left Mr. Turner in charge of the biggest hotel in Selma, which is an amazing story, right? It speaks to what kind of man Mr. Turner was.
He also owned his own livery stable, which he paid his owner for every month, but he did a wonderful job with that. But when he was married, another harsh truth of slavery is that his wife was sold off, and so he was left with his child to raise his child, and that's what happened to so many families. They were torn apart by being sold to other people. It was property. They were property.
Pardon me. I was struck by how diligent Benjamin Turner worked to secure his freedom. And I was wondering, when slaves bought their freedom, how did the process work? How much money did they need? And were there any legal documents that were required?
There were legal documents required, and it was very hard to do. I mean, it was discouraged. Emancipation was discouraged by the laws of Alabama. It literally took an act of the legislature for an individual slave to be emancipated by his owner, even if the enslaved person had somehow accumulated enough money. And slaves were valuable property. I mean, it was expensive, and so once Benjamin Turner had amassed $1,000 to try to buy his own freedom, and his owner said, "That's not enough. You're worth more than that." So it was extremely hard, and Turner was not freed until after the end of the Civil War, when emancipation came at the end of the war. That was when he finally began living his life as a free man.
Tell us a little bit about the Reconstruction period.
It was, it was a time of both promise and heartbreak and cruelty. Promise because people who had been enslaved pursued their citizenship rights, because that was in a way the same thing as affirming their very humanity. If you're not a citizen, then you're less than, right? So they wanted to vote and they wanted to participate in the political process. They also began establishing schools and colleges and churches, sometimes with support from white people in the North who had money to give, former abolitionists, that kind of thing. So it was a time of aspiration and hope. But it only lasted from the end of the Civil War until about 1876 or so, when troops were removed from the South and the defeated Confederacy. The leaders of that, in many cases, were still the white leaders of the South, and so they put an end. They began to take away the rights that the freedom had begun to enjoy and had begun to assert. And so think about the bitterness and the heartbreak, the disappointment. If you had been enslaved and then you were free because of the bloody war, the bloodiest war in American history. And then that all is taken away, and it's another 100 years before the civil rights movement comes along to address the inequities and the inequalities. So So we wanted to at least for young readers hint at some of that in this book, but also talk about the extraordinary courage and wisdom and vision of a man like Benjamin Sterling Turner. There are other leaders like that in African-American leaders in Congress. A wonderful guy from South Carolina named Robert Smalls, who has been the subject of some children's books. Extraordinary man. So that was all part of it too. Aspiration and bitterness and loss.
I was just amazed I was astounded at the achievements that Benjamin Turner did after the Civil War, founding a school for colored children, becoming a tax collector, and being elected to the Selma Council. Could you please tell us why Black and white citizens were confident in his leadership skills? What won them over? Was he a charismatic individual? Please tell us about his leadership skills.
What do you think?
I think that
Well, I think that he had, it was easy to see. We don't know exactly how he carried himself, whether he was, although we do know he's a large guy and had kind of a commanding physical presence, but there was an inner wisdom that he had about him, I think, that inspired confidence, certainly among the freedmen and among some white people too. He did not seem to be looking for a fight, He wanted to talk about binding up wounds and working together. He was not a man who was motivated by revenge. Not that you couldn't understand that if he had been, but in fact he wasn't. And so that was reassuring to some people.
excuse me.
Yeah, our phone is ringing in the room where we are. I don't know what that is. Anyway, I think that was reassuring to some people, and yet it has to be said that the majority of white people did not support his candidacy. And then when he ran for re-election, white leaders persuaded another African-American man to enter the race, split the black vote, and then a white candidate won. So he only served one term in Congress. And yet the things that he stood for, we thought deserved to be remembered because of the character and the vision that they revealed. And he had been forgotten in history, except in Selma, where he is a respected figure. There's a monument to him at his grave where that was erected by a multiracial group of citizens. So he was an amazing guy, and we both felt, I think, honored to.
Oh yeah, he was. He was very truthful. He would always put aside his anger, resentment, bitterness for the greater good. He was always working towards the greater good. And I think that spoke so very highly of him. No matter what happened, he wanted to do what was best. He felt that he wanted to he just wanted to do well for everyone. He didn't have any resentment. And I think Frye mentioned this before, the universal suffrage, universal amnesty. He wanted everyone to be okay. He knew that both sides had struggled and suffered and the end of the war. And, he was ready to just move forward instead of moving backwards.
Mm-hmm. Just from reading the book, it seemed like he had some great oracle skills.
Yes.
He was an amazing public speaker. How did that pretty much shape his political career? I mean, his speeches seemed to be, to reach to a lot of people.
Yeah, he did have a wonderful way with words, and so he could speak on the campaign trail in Selma, and people experienced that in his district. The irony was that he was not even allowed to deliver those amazing speeches on the floor of Congress.
Yeah.
White members of Congress refused to let him speak, which was another indignity. I mean, you just can imagine how angry that must have made him. But what he did is just enter the speeches in the record of congressional sessions and let the words stand for themselves. So it's he was amazing in his eloquence and in the power of his ideas. And so, yeah.
Yeah, that was one of our questions, is how was he received in Congress when he got there?
Yeah.
Not well. Unfortunately, not well. It was a shame that all of his speeches ended up in the congressional record or in the congressional globe, but not heard.
Okay, it looks like we have a question from the audience. Lorraine Griffin wants to know, do you know what happened to his son? Was he and his wife ever together again?
No, as far as we know, no. He and his wife were never together again. And we have been asked that question about his son so often, and we do not know. I was looking on Ancestry when we were doing the research, and I did find an Osceola,
which was his son's name.
Yeah, and it was about that same time, but I didn't dig any deeper at that point. So perhaps there will be another book. I don't know.
Yeah, we don't know the answer to that question. We do know that he remarried, and very happily, it appears, and that he used his money to send the nephews and relatives of his second wife to college and to create opportunities for them. And we also know that in the time after his time in Congress, he continued to be quietly active in civic life. He was a delegate to the Republican National Convention. The Republicans were the party of Lincoln. They were the party of, at their best, they were the party of equal rights. And so he cast their lot with them. He also farmed profitably and paid a decent wage to other former slaves to work his property. So he tried to contribute to the community in all sorts of ways whenever that was possible.
Was it unusual for an owner to let a slave run their business? Was that normal?
Absolutely, it was unusual.
Yeah.
It spoke to his, I think, to his trustworthiness. It spoke to his just ability that he could be entrusted. And this wasn't just some dinky little hotel. This was the nicest hotel in Selma, and it still is. Hilton has just refurbished it, and it's a wonderful place. But it's been in existence since, well before the Civil War. So amazing.
And interestingly enough, even as an enslaved individual, he was not sold when his owner, Mrs. Turner, needed funds. She gave him to her, her family members. And then again, when those people died, he was with another family member. So he stayed with the family, the Gees, and I think that probably allowed them to know him from one family member to another. And again, his trustworthiness, his good business sense, those kinds of things always continued to ring true. I think that was probably part of the reason that he was trusted to do the things that he did.
In the book, it said that Benjamin was opposed to the cotton tax because he thought it was hurtful for small farmers, particularly black farmers. Could you please tell us about the cotton tax and his political implications?
Yeah, it was a tax on it was a direct tax on the cotton that a person raised, and when you sold it, you had to pay a tax on it. And the smaller your farm, the less money you were going to bring in. And so the small farmers were living right on the margins. If they had land at all, very often they were just sharecroppers. So one of the things that Turner did was, in fact, push for reparations in the form of land that could be bought affordably by former slaves so that they could establish an independent economic base.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the people who'd been enslaved, that didn't happen. They did not own land of their own, or they had to really struggle to buy their own land and hold on to it. But some people did, and Turner did not want a tax that would cripple their ability to make a living from one year to the next. And so that's what he pushed for. He was especially concerned about black farmers, but he also was concerned about small farmers who were white as well, because they were adversely affected by these kind of taxes. So it's almost a class thing. He was aware that people who were kind of on the margins, who were struggling to make ends meet with a small farm, needed help from the government, not taxes that crippled their ability to make a living. That was basically where he was coming from.
Wow.
Once again, a wise man, right? I mean, just
amazing,
incredible decency.
I'm gonna go back to the beginning. You talked a little bit about where you read some excerpts from how he learned to read. What would happen to him or slaves during that time if their owners found out that they had learned to read?
They would be harshly reprimanded. They would be beaten. It was just a horrible time. White owners were so fearful that their slaves would become literate, that they would understand their lot in life and, of course, want better for themselves and their families. And they would revolt, which, Nat Turner did, and many others did. So anything that they could do to keep their enslaved people down and not learn anything, no reading, no writing, that's what they would do. And they made sure that it was a public spectacle so other people, other slaves in their camp could see that. And this is what'll happen to you if you try to learn to read.
Mm-hmm.
So just the bravery that it took, and of course he wasn't the only one who did that. I mean, there are other stories many other stories in history. That's the thing about the history of slavery, to me, is that it is of course a story of horrible injustice. I mean, of the worst possible kind. And yet threaded through that story always is this persistent affirmation, this persistent aspiration. So many slaves ran away, and when they did, like Harriet Tubman or Frederick Douglass or whatever, then they became involved in trying to help other people escape. So the aspiration for freedom was always there, and so that's part of the story too. And I think that's, in a way, when you look at it, it seems to me. I mean, I obviously I'm not African American, but when I look at Black history from the outside looking in, what I see is a story of the country's injustice, but I also see a story of extraordinary leaders who came along all throughout our history, and tried to make things better. Certainly for African Americans, but I would argue that makes all of us more free. I think Martin Luther King was right about that. So.
Could you please tell us about Benjamin Turner's his role in the military during the Civil War, and briefly, if you could, the role of African American slaves during the Civil War on both the Union and the Confederate side?
Well, yeah. So Benjamin Turner did help form a black, was it a regiment or a company? I can't remember the size of it. In Selma after the Union forces came there in 1865. He didn't see much fighting, didn't see much action, but he was prepared to do whatever he could to win the war for the side that he thought would end slavery. There are other figures. One of them, mentioned Robert Smalls earlier in South Carolina. He was actually involved in much more in the fighting during the war. Before he was freed and later became a member of Congress from South Carolina, during the war, he actually stole a Confederate ship and turned it over to the Union Navy. This amazingly brave, bold thing that he did, and then pushed President Lincoln to allow enslaved people to fight for their own freedom. So there are those kinds of stories, and of course there were black regiments that fought in a number of major battles. One of the last battles of the war was right outside of my hometown of Mobile. It was at a place called Blakely in the swampy country just north of the city of Mobile. And there were black troops fighting there, fought valiantly there. That battle was fought on the day that General Lee surrendered at Appomattox, but word had not reached Alabama that this had happened. And so there was this bloody battle involving African-American troops, not exclusively, but they were some of the major participants. Mm-hmm. So that was a theme that ran through the Civil War, black men fighting for their own freedom.
Yeah, I think I read too that he was willing to support either side, the Confederate or the Union side, to gain his freedom. Yep. Was that something what slaves did?
I don't know how common that was, but that was his pragmatic view. Whoever will set me free, I'm with you. But he quickly realized that would be the Union side, and particularly after Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, he could see which side would be the one to cast his lot with. There's a story that we don't tell in the book. When he was first beginning his political career, he went to some of the white Democratic leaders. The Democratic Party in those days was the conservative party who favored white supremacy. He went to some of those leaders and said, we'll work with you if you support equal rights. And they rejected that possibility, and so that never happened. He became more and more committed to the Republican Party because it did support equal rights, at least for a while.
How did he gain the confidence of white voters? I was wondering about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. He couldn't gain the confidence of the majority of them. They just were too embittered by the loss of the war and too wedded to the racist assumptions of slavery and all of that. But he did gain the confidence of some, and I think it was because just of the kind of man he was, don't you?
Well, I think it was the kind of man he was, but also there were a lot of white people who were abolitionists, and they didn't believe in the ideas of slavery. And, we would call them more liberal these days. But, there were white people who felt that way back then. So I just think it was, I think it's just human nature. Some people, and it's the way you're raised. And, when you think about separate but equal, it was a little bit different, but at least people had empathy for the Black man, for those people. So he gained their confidence because of the man he was, but I think he was allowed to do that by the way of their hearts and their minds.
How important do you think it was for Benjamin to hire other slaves so they could earn money to secure their freedom? How important do you think it was to him?
Oh, I think it was most important. It gives you a value. I am valued by someone. He is paying me to do the work that other people were not. It gives dignity, pride. I'm working. I'm supporting my family. Yeah.
And just establishing, some kind of economic base.
Yeah.
And some of those folks were able to save some of that money and then and so landowning for, in the late 1800s and early 1900s was, a major step on the road to greater freedom for African-American people. And so, Turner wanted to be a part of that in some ways, as well as something like more visible, like running for Congress. I think it's important to remember that, a lot of us who were raised up during the civil rights era, or maybe we've been taught about that a little bit, maybe we've been taught about some of the cruelties of slavery, and that was the defining character of slavery, was that it was incredibly cruel. But it's so important to remember the people who worked against injustice way back into our history. They should never be forgotten because of the bravery and wisdom that it took to do that. It's harder then than it is now. Not that it's necessarily easy now, and not that the issue is resolved. I mean, good gracious, we've got so far to go on that issue now, but I think we can enjoy, I think we can benefit from understanding that there were people who came before us who saw injustice and spoke out against it and stood against it, and it inspires us to do the same thing.
Yeah, that was one of the things we were wondering about. It's like, he was so smart and he worked really hard. And we were just wondering, like, how did he overcome such oppression to become, a congressman?
It's an amazing, it's an amazing thing. I mean, I think most of us couldn't have, when you think about the improbability of that, everything around him told him that life was hopeless and dead end, and yet he said, no, I do not accept that. Right. I don't accept it for myself, and I don't accept it for others. And so he was a quieter figure, I suppose, than somebody like Frederick Douglass, but in the same way that Frederick Douglass or Harriet Tubman or Turner Truth or others, they witnessed for the right to be free, and he did it in his quieter, personal way until he could become a member of Congress, and then he was more public about it.
Or he tried to be.
Right.
Could you tell us about his religious convictions? Was he a religious man? What church he attended?
We don't know that.
We don't really know that. We know that he somehow found the faith to believe that things could be better. We know that he was married in a church when he was married the first time. So there are indications that he was a man of faith, but we don't know. We never came upon the details of that in the research that we did in the library and through the research of other historians. There's a historian in Selma named Alton Fitz who did a lot of research about Benjamin Turner and made some of that available to us. But I don't recall seeing the specific answer to the question that you just asked.
He attended the church of his owner, but that was never specified either. But that was where he was married. His owner actually paid for that wedding. So,
Wow.
Yeah, very interesting. Paid for the wedding, and it was lovely. But it never specified a particular religion or religious sect.
Who would you what ages? I mean, this is a children's book. What ages would you recommend for children to read this book?
So, in my looking at it and trying to decide readability and so forth, there are many states whose fourth grade standards, so 9-year-olds, include the Civil War and Reconstruction. And so we wanted our target audience to be, third, fourth grade. It's harder for third and under to have any context at all of the Civil War and slavery and so forth. So fourth grade and up, but adults can learn from it too. I know that one of the fabulous things about picture books that tell this kind of history is for students who are here for, speaking another language, ESOL students, special ed students, where the illustrations, like you said, Marcia, earlier, they fill in the blanks sometimes when kids don't understand. Teachers can discuss the details in the illustrations and what do you think is happening and the emotions on the people's faces and those things. So although, we suggest fourth grade and fourth through sixth or seventh grade, it's really opened up some doors, I think, middle school and high school. We were told by a high school teacher that this fills in so many gaps that were not there for him, and he would be able to read this story to his students, read it aloud, and the read alouds, they just don't ever become unimportant. No matter what grade you are in, a teacher can lend so much emotion and modeling reading behaviors and so forth. So they can use it in whatever grade above fourth, pretty much, or fourth, I should say.
The other thing that we were struck by when we could get out into schools was that it did not matter what kind of audience it was, whether it was a predominantly white school or predominantly African American school, because they identified with the human story. They just identified with this extraordinary man and admired what he did. We made one presentation at an all-white private school, and those kids just loved Benjamin Sterling Turner. I mean, how could you not? But they saw what kind of human being he was, and it was easy for them to see beyond his color.
And they were taken aback, I think, by the injustice. Fourth graders, but that's not right. That's not right. Why? That was, and And then on the other side, we did a presentation at an African American school, and Terry Sewell, who is the representative in his county right now, came, and it was wonderful because she was able to, she actually put the book on her shoulder and she says, I stand on the shoulders of this man.
Mm-hmm.
And you can be and do whatever you dream. And that was just so powerful. So yeah, we've had a good time with it, and we really have, and very happy, to tell his story over and over again.
What are you guys working on next? Are you still, you're going to collaborate on something else?
Well,
yes, we have just finished a book that will be out after the first of the year.
Yes.
And you want to tell what that is?
Should I show him the cover?
Yeah.
Am I allowed to do that?
Yeah. Yes, you are.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Yeah, we have an advanced copy of it. It's I'll tell you about it while Marty's getting it. It's a story of the Rosenwald schools, and a lot of people, some people know the story and some don't, but basically in the early 1900s, a Jewish philanthropist named Julius Rosenwald, working with Booker T. Washington at Tuskegee Institute, provided seed money for the building of more than 5,000 schools for African-American children across the South and the border states. And in many ways, it was this transformative piece of philanthropy, and the communities where these schools were built all had to contribute, and all did contribute, in time and resources to the construction. And so there was a sense of ownership and pride that these communities felt about the schools. And so it was it was an amazing thing that happened that some people know about and some don't, and we wanted to tell it for young readers.
So this is the cover.
Yeah, there we go.
There we go. And Maya Angelou was a graduate of a Rosenwald school. John Lewis was a graduate of a Rosenwald school. Many of the Harlem Renaissance artists, all different forms of art, when I say art, were helped by the Rosenwald Fund, which was created a little bit later on. But it was an amazing story to be able to tell. And there are many, many schools that are either have been made into community centers, museums, all across the Southeast. They go from Texas all the way up to Virginia, I believe. And some of them are in complete disrepair, but communities around support to do something to keep those schools alive, which is very important.
So when is it coming out?
We think January, right?
I think so.
That's soon. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So
We're very excited.
Sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
No, I didn't know about the Rosenwald School, so I'm looking forward to reading about it.
Yes.
we can get you a copy. We know
We
people.
do.
More people.
We love a copy.
Yep, sure.
Absolutely.
Okay. Great. So yeah, there are so many stories to tell, you know, it's important it's important for African-American authors to tell African-American stories. But, I think it's important for white writers and teachers to make that leap of moral imagination and try to understand, the history that has affected all of us. And so we are eager to kind of keep doing that. The other thing is that the Rosenwald story is a story of Black and Jewish cooperation. And it's really close to Marty's heart because she is Jewish and she has mixed race grandchildren. And so we want one thing was we want to hurt grandchildren to know these kinds of stories. But all kids need to know that what a rich, complicated history our country has.
It's a universal story. It's everyone's history.
It is.
Yes.
That is so true. So true.
So yeah, I was going to ask you. I was going to add. Well, I think you answered that question, so I'll move on to something else. I'm just excited. I just didn't know about him. I did not. I've never heard of him before. I mean, I know people know about him in Alabama, but he is not universally known. So I'm really, really happy that you guys wrote the story so that all of us can learn about Benjamin Sterling Turner, because I did not know about him.
That we didn't either. We stumbled upon the story too, and we said, this is an amazing story. It needs to be out there. So it was really exciting to have a chance to do that.
And we were able to, like I said earlier, to travel to Selma and, like walking. It's walking history, walking in history and going to the library and reading things. And when Frye spoke earlier about his second wife and how he helped his nephews and so forth, his wife's side of the family go to college, we actually found a newspaper article about that. And to read an actual newspaper and see a photograph in the newspaper of his wife. And, it's so exciting to see those primary sources and photographs. We saw the actual voting record when he defeated Mr. Cummings, and just to see the history in print, it was very exciting.
Well, it's a great read aloud. I'm definitely going to give it out as Christmas gifts this year.
Wonderful, thank you so
And
much.
I definitely have my own personal copy, so I love it. It's just history I didn't know about.
I just like to thank you for your interest and contribution to American and African American history. I think I know it's wonderful what you're doing, and we greatly appreciate it. And I knew something about the Roosevelt School, but not as much. And I really do hope that your books will be very successful and people will return to them again and again.
Thank you, John.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're definitely excited about the new book, and we would love to have you if you'd like to come and have a virtual conversation with us. I can tell you right now, we'd be happy to book it. So we'll talk to you about that. And
Yes.
we love
to do that. So
yeah, we'd love to bring you.
Great.
And I have to say that it's just been such a wonderful discussion. And I thank Frye and Marty, both of you, for joining us and being with us today and taking time to just share your knowledge and your experience with us. It's been amazing. And John and Marcia, you were fantastic hosts. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you,
Marcia. Thank you, everybody.
It's been, for those people watching at home, the absolute best, most wonderful way that you can support artists and writers is to buy their work. And so this is an incredible book. The story you've heard a lot about, it's wonderful. The art in this book is absolutely extraordinary. And so you can support all three of the people whose incredible efforts went into telling the story for you by buying the book. And you can purchase it from your favorite independent bookstore. We love Mahogany Books here in Prince George's County, mahoganybooks.com. And we really encourage you to go there. And you can also buy it directly from NewSouth Books. And if you want to, of course, you can also visit our friends, Prince George's County Memorial Library System, and you can take it out from them. If you don't have a library card, they'd be happy to help you. pgcmls.info. We here at the Office of Human Rights appreciate all of your time, the fact that you join us and you participate with us in all of these various activities. And we invite you to join us in our upcoming events. You can learn more about our office at civilrights.mypgc.us. And you can follow us on Twitter at PGCOHR and follow the library across all social media platforms at PGCMLS. It has been absolutely wonderful. Thank all four of you so much. And for those of you watching, we wish you the best day. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Frye. Bye, Marty.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Don.